Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Reshad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to ReshadOberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day leadership challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm joined by Brabo. Bo is a professional speaker, leadership and executive coach, and business consultant. Bo also co-hosts the podcast, The Bo and Luke Show. Bo's book, From the Battlefield to the White House to the Boardroom, draws on his experience in the U.S. Army and his time serving the Bush and Obama administrations as Chief of HR Operations and Presidential Communications Officer. And throughout this book, Bo details why values-based leadership is imperative to long-term results and profitable growth. Bo, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, it is awesome to be here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me. I'm really excited to have you on and to dive into some of the subject material we've got lined up today.
Yeah.
So I think that the first question that comes to mind and probably is on the mind of many people listening right now is, what was it like working in the White House?
Wow, that was truly one of those once in a lifetime opportunities. And it was probably for sure the best professional work experience that I had for sure. The level of responsibility and I hope we get into it. Just working within leading teams within that environment, which was a zero defect environment. It's what we called it then. It's what I still refer to it now. Mm-hmm. Was truly something I've never experienced anywhere else, even in combat in Iraq. Mistakes get made. You retrain people and you keep moving forward. But when you're in the White House and you're working directly for the president and leading the communications teams in those efforts, there's mistakes do happen, but they're very costly. Even the smallest mistakes are very costly, and it's just something that you cannot allow to happen.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a zero defect environment. Like what is that?
No, that means that you're always like you're always on, and you have to always be prepared. You have to be the best at what you're doing every day, and perfect example. And I use the analogy of comparing it to like a rock band. When a rock band shows up to give a concert, normally there's some type of rehearsal before the actual fans show up and they get on stage to do their performance. They're, the band members themselves maybe checking things out, making sure, whether they rented equipment, whatever, it works and it's set up the way that they like to have it set up. But when the president arrives and he steps up to the podium, there's no rehearsal. It's only game time always. So when we talk about zero defects, you work in an environment where everything has to work. It has to go just as planned every single time. Because when it's game day, the president arrives and he steps up to speak anywhere in the world, everything has to work. And any type of defect, anything at all, is a bad thing. I've never had it happen to me, thank goodness, or to my teams that I was with, but there's been incidents where you see on the news or on TV and the glass from the teleprompter stand, which is in front of the podium, falls off in the middle of the president giving his speech. And that yes, can things like that happen? Sure. But that's the type of thing of, you know, the minute detail have to be checked. Every task of, down to this is like zero defects. You can't have a bolt or a lug nut, a screw loose. I mean, it's not an option, because those types of things can happen, and that's a global embarrassment to the office of the president, right? Um, yeah. So I hope I explained that well enough. It's making sure that every task is completed and
Sure.
gets completed and is going to be completed
Hmm.
without missing a beat.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
imagine that taught you a lot in your career and in your professional growth and what you do now. Like, so what is zero defect environment mean in terms of what you're doing now and in terms of what
Yeah,
you do with your clients?
absolutely. Um, it comes with making sure that the clients and helping them work through uh, all of the nitty gritty that they have to do or they should be looking at to meet their objectives or the milestones that they have to meet based upon the goals they've set for themselves, for their companies, whatever the case might be. So it's getting very granular in what that means, and then establishing the tactics to actually accomplish those tasks, and making sure that they don't miss a beat. So that's kind of what it has done for me and how I translate that into working with corporate executives and so forth. And then that transcends into you're working with folks and you're setting priorities, uh, and once they've established what those priorities are and you have this great plan and you know all the tactics you're going to do, makes it easier for you to deflect things that aren't on that list or things that come at you every day and it doesn't support your priorities or it doesn't support the actions that you're going to be taking to meet your objectives. You can more easily either delegate, send that to some other department, to somebody else, or say, hey, that's not something our company is working on at this time, and doesn't fit into our services or our product lines or what we're going after, so we have to push that off to the side. Yeah.
So kind of a framework for getting things done, so
Yeah,
to speak, right? And kind of
it
staying
is.
on track.
Yeah, framework, a blueprint. I'm all about the how to actually get it done, how to do better every day. Uh, I've talked to a lot of folks. Coaches may come in and would talk strategies. A lot about strategy, and that's important. And it's important to have a strategy, but you can't leave your client hanging with, well, here's your strategy. Now you go figure out how to do it, right? So I get into I use all of those experiences of my background and my past to get into, all right, we've got the strategy, but now we have to take it to the next level and figure out what you're going to do with it and how to do it.
Well, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, I think your background must lend itself very well to that kind of work.
Yeah, I think it does, for sure. And I just impart, yeah, no holds barred for me. I impart as much as I can in a short amount of a time frame, whatever I have with my clients, to leave them in a place where they can execute and get more out of what they were going after than they did before they started working with me, for sure.
So backing it up a little bit, talking a bit more
Yeah.
about that experience and your background, like walk us
Mhm.
through the journey that brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. So my journey started, it really started to support this book and how I even came up with writing it. It really started when I was in high school. And back in I'll age myself, but back in the 80s, high schools, maybe even before then, there were career days. A whole bunch of professionals from different careers would come in, adults, and they'd talk mostly to the juniors and seniors about what types of professions are out there, just to start inspiring young minds and so forth. And there was an Army National Guard recruiter that came to speak, and I was intrigued. I listened, and I was intrigued. And my father had served in the Navy in Vietnam. My two grandfathers were Army veterans serving during World War II. So then when I was listening to this gentleman speak, it kind of all resonated with me. And I took the aptitude test, and I was a junior in high school. I was 17, and I signed up. I signed up for it was at that time as the Michigan Army National Guard, which is one of the three branches of the U.S. Army, and finished my junior year of high school, and I went to boot camp. So I was only 17 years old. So my parents had to give consent, and I went to basic training, and I learned. My gosh, I give all the credit to that for learning discipline. Learning how to get up in the morning, learning how to exercise and get fit and be physically tough and mentally tough and being resilient. So I feel very blessed that I volunteered and raised my right hand at an early age and got some stuff that I wouldn't have probably gotten anywhere else. And then I went back and completed high school, but I was still in the National Guard. That was 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. In that time frame, there weren't any wars going on at the time. So that was the cadence. And then I went to undergrad, got my bachelor's degree, and then I was working full time, about starting a family. And then my National Guard time ended, and I was only out for about 3 months, and I just missed wearing the uniform every day. So I took another leap, and I went back in and I joined the Army, just full-time active duty, no more weekend stuff. Just, hey, I want to do this. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go after it full time. And that was the beginning of the full-time Army journey. And I did that for over 20 years. And I always had I gave a speech a couple of weeks ago at a company here locally, and I always had the attitude of saying yes. Opportunities would arise. Somebody would ask me to do something, or if I wanted to participate in something, and I would say yes. And that truly opened a lot of doors for me, to include about maybe 7 years in to my 20 years. I got the first phone call to go work, get recruited and go work at the White House. So I actually was there 2 different times for a total of 10 years. But I said, yes, I would love to do it. I want that opportunity. Got recruited, passed all the interviews and so forth, started working, and was there for a few years. And I wanted to do some more type of things in my military career. So I became a U.S. Army warrant officer, went to Germany, Iraq, and then I happened to go back and replace my boss, who I was working for at the White House the first time. So I was gone for a few years, and then I went back and I led. This time I was in charge of the HR department as a whole. And then I stayed there for 7.5 years, became a communications officer, started leading the teams for President Bush. Started with President Bush, and then when President Obama came in 2009, it transitioned over to him. And then I hit the 20-year mark, and I felt like I had reached the pinnacle of a military career. President's the commander in chief. Can't get any higher than that with who you're working for. So I decided that I would retire and join corporate America, and that's what I did. And that was 7.5 years ago. Which brings me, to where I'm at today. So a couple different executive roles in corporate America, to starting my own company myself and helping others in their leadership crucible, and developing their own skills and talents, those of their people, and so forth. And I really take a values-based approach to that, which I talk about in the book.
Yeah. And so all of those experiences that you just described for us brought you to values-based leadership, which you talk about in your book. Can you first of all define what values-based leadership is? Sure. And then secondly, can you explain why you believe that values-based leadership is actually so imperative?
Yeah, for sure. So values-based leadership is based on a litany of behaviors, individual behaviors that all add up across an organization to what you would call your organizational behaviors, and how people come to work and literally behave every day. How do they act? How do they perform their jobs? What are the behaviors they demonstrate? All of that, when you talk values-based leadership, all of those behaviors should be encapsulated in set of company core values. And you can look at that and that's led from the top. That's the CEO saying these are the values that I believe in. These are the values that I demonstrate, and these are the ones that are going to show people who we are as a company. And in the absence of any set of official corporate values, I look at clients and I tell them, I said, well, you really do have values. You may not have written them down, but if I just followed you around for a week and you didn't know I was following you, I would just write down all of the behaviors that you demonstrated, and I would turn those into describing your values and what it is that you believe in, because it's what you do every single day. So when you talk values-based leadership and saying, okay, we have this set of core values, but it's not enough just to write them down and say, these are our values. Maybe it's great customer service or integrity. We have empathy and compassion for our customers. Okay, you need to take that a little bit further and say, what are all the behaviors that you would want to see from all your employees that would say, yep, they actually demonstrate empathy toward our clients or toward each other, right? What are they? Do you have all of those behaviors outlined in all your job descriptions? Do you have interview questions when you're trying to find new top talent coming into your company that are designed to elicit responses that would say, well, this person believes like we do, they behave like we do, or they behave in accordance with our core values, or not? Are they? And that kind of leads to, are they going to be a good fit or not a good fit for your company? And when you add all that up, Reshad, and I put this formula, I'm like, how do I explain this to people where you can, more than just talking, but you could see it in a nice, neat little formula, right? So I did that in the book. And I always tell people, if you get nothing else from this book, please read chapter 1 and look at the formula, and always remember behaviors. Because when you add up all the behaviors and you multiply those by all the employees in the company, you're going to have this outcome. And that outcome is the culture of your company. So when you're thinking about, I want to have a certain type of culture, you don't attack culture. You got to attack the behaviors, because if your behaviors aren't right, or you don't like what you're seeing, that's what you have to change. Those are the physical attributes in all of your employees, all of your individuals, that you have to work on in order to achieve the culture, the desired state that you want to achieve. I had a CFO, a good friend of mine, and I give him credit. It wasn't my saying, but and I jumped on it real quick, and he was right. Your culture, your company culture exists, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's there. So you have to take concerted effort if you want a certain type of culture, or if people, if it's bad or whatever, you have to take the effort to change it and get it where you want it to be. But it's looking at behaviors that will get it to the point that you need it to be.
Right. So yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, values and behaviors and the outcome of culture is obviously important, and like you say, it's always there. A few weeks ago on an earlier episode number 23 with Curie and Therakin, we were talking a lot about stories and culture and the framework of culture and everything that goes into it. And one of the things that he said is culture is the always on operating system. It's there whether you like it or not. So you're either going to engineer it, or it's just going to sort of engineer itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think that's right in line. And I love the way that that's put, right? The operating system that's always on, because, I would say he's absolutely right, because it's a result. I went as far as to say, okay, how is culture defined in the dictionary, right? How is it actually defined? And I said, well, this is pretty simple. It says it's an outcome. It's a result of. So what's it a result of? Well, it's a result of how we behave every day, and so forth. And you can think of that in work, at home, in your life, in your community. That's where that comes from. So I love that. That's great.
And I mean, I think that, like you say, the behaviors really are predicated on the values of the organization, whether they're defined or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
important, I think, to sit down and define what you actually value and what you actually believe.
Mm-hmm.
So,
100%.
yeah, and like talking about your military experience, the U.S. Army has over 2 million active and reserve members, and yet we can say that as a whole, the values and cultures seem to remain very consistent.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about values from that perspective?
Yeah, and that great question. I'm glad you asked that, because that was really what drove my initial premise of writing this book and how I was going to attack it. Because the Army, like you said, 2 million plus members, active in reserves, been around 250 years, and how do they function? And in a consistent way with so many people. And there are seven Army values, and I lay those out in the book as an example of, if you don't have values, like if you're a company struggling to figure out what are your values, you could easily adopt the Army's values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, and figure out how to, and I outlined those, how you could actually employ that in your organization. Those values, not only are they've been established for a long time, they are reiterated up and down the leadership chain from the moment you step off of a bus and you're into boot camp. I mean, you're learning those values. They start with you on day one. So you are, and then everything all the training that you go through, 100%. Your performance evaluations, it's all laid out on the types of behaviors that we expect. And oh, by the way, they'll be sure to point out if your behaviors are not in line with the values themselves and the types of actions that you should be taking and how you should conduct yourself. So that was the big premise for, all right, this is super well established in this organization. I mean, it is the bedrock and foundation of such a amazing place, and there's got to be a way to translate that to help small, medium, large size businesses who may not have this at the forefront of their mind because they're so ingrained in the day to day. I got to make money, I got to get services, we got to keep our clients happy, got to come out with that next product, and this is kind of often one of those things that could be an afterthought. But in reality, it's something, if you pay attention to, it will deliver the type of organization that you want. All kinds of studies on that. We don't have to get into that here, where companies that do this, the return on that investment is incredible compared to companies that don't. You're talking reduced turnover. You're talking increased profits, increased net margins, sales revenues. People are just more aligned with each other and with the mission and the values of the company. And it makes for a greater place to work overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're talking a lot about, and in the Army experience, like you step foot off the bus and you're kind of quote unquote indoctrinated in these values from the very moment that you set foot on the ground at training camp. It's in your performance evaluations, it's talked about, it's spoken about, it's encouraged, behaviors are pointed out. So there's sort of this relentlessness to it. I guess, how do we translate this to the business environment, and how can the listener begin to formulate their own values?
Yeah, I think that in the business environment, number one, it's important to have, and it's important to have your values. So if you think, and this is, business school 101, mission, vision, values. Well, don't skip the values piece when you're thinking about what you want to market for your company, right? Your website, your whatever you put out there on social media for marketing, your LinkedIn page, whatever the case might be. Make sure your values are listed and what they mean to the company. And then internal to your company, and this is something that I always made sure that we did, like when you're talking about, from the Army, we'll call it you're being indoctrinated, but all of the companies doing onboarding for new employees, that has to be part of onboarding. What are the company values? You have to start talking about those from the very beginning, as soon as people join the company. And oh, by the way, that's a messaging that should be happening frequently, coming from the top, coming from the department manager. Like, everybody needs to be. It's not something that you just put on the website and forget that they're there, or you've got them listed on the wall, in your corporate office. They have to be talked about. They have to be celebrated. Part of your incentive system. If you see somebody truly going above and beyond, and they're really emulating your company values, or one or two of them, celebrate it. Reward them, whatever the case might be. There's ways to do that. So that's how you bring all that into corporate America, and make time for it, because it'll really make a difference in your environment.
Right. And what's the starting point for people to actually write down their values, or define them, or make sense of what's in their head and their heart, but get it out into their company?
Yeah, I think that the easiest way, if you're listening and you're in charge of your company or your organization, and you don't have these, or maybe you have them and you think they need to change, just spend some quiet time writing down what you believe, and how you should come to work. And I would say, even if you don't say, like, these are our values, just write down write a paragraph about how you believe you would behave every day at work. I come to work, I'm on time by whatever. You got to be on time. Well, that's, punctuality. We believe in punctuality. There's your value. Everybody needs to be to work on time. That's something that we believe in. So then you assign a word or a phrase to that belief. And I would just say it's probably easier for you to write what you do every day from a personal perspective, and then review that and say, what am I defining? So you might be defining things before you actually come up with the word that you're defining. So it's just writing down how you behave every day and what you believe, and then transform that into values. And another good exercise, if you're really struggling, and this would probably work well, depends on what kind of technologies you have. If you're a big company or even a small company, we've done this before. Ask your employees, involve them, get them engaged. Say, hey, what are your three, respond to this survey. I want everybody's opinion. What are your three top values, right? Or the three values that you see here that you would like to be part of our company values, core values, right? Ask them to respond, and then do like a picture graph with words, like a word graph, right? So you'll get all of these responses, you'll list them all out, and you probably have people saying some of the same things. And the next thing you know, there's some commonality, right, amongst your employees. You're like, wow, these three words or these three values were mentioned the most from all of the participants who sent in their thoughts, and they gave you feedback. That's one way to get others involved in what they think, and so forth. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I think that's a good starting point for people. Playing a little bit of a devil's advocate role here, like, what would you say to people who are sort of the mind that they don't need to write these values down, or they're, everybody knows what we believe in, like it's kind of a little bit of a, they just brush it off a little bit. Like, what would you say to people that are of that mindset?
Yeah, I would say, that might be true for everybody who's in your company or who's been there for some time. But what about your new employees? What about people who want to join your company? How do they know what you really stand for and what you're really all about? How do they know? How do you share that message with new employees, or with new leaders, the people that you promote within your company? How do you ingrain in them to be better? They may have never been a leader before, and now you've promoted them and they have a team, right? How do they take that and use that for their own professional development if you're not writing things down, if you're not developing your teams in a way that they have substantive things to grab onto? Yeah, and if I had to, I direct them to studies where even large corporations that take the time to employ values-based leadership skyrocket compared to their competition. Yeah.
And so, what is the risk, do you think, of an organization sort of allowing the values to define themselves, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier with even a previous guest, that you let them define them themselves, you're going to end up with a corporate environment or your corporate culture that you might not like, or you might not want, or you don't understand why things are happening in a certain way, because you're just letting things evolve on their own, because people will just be people. I mean, we're human. We're going to go to work and just kind of, if without that type of direction or the framework, a framework of behavior inside this specific organization, you're just going to act however you normally act, and everybody else is going to do the same thing. And who knows what you're going to get out of that recipe? It might not be very desirable. Probably won't be. And it can lead to, it can just lead to a lot of bad things for your company.
In my mind, I think that many of the, I don't know, widely publicized corporate scandals of the past can be brought back to matters such as this, of not having well-defined values and sticking to them. Companies like Enron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, systematically they became, very distrustful and unethical in their approach to business. So would you say that is true too, or?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Right. So you have, and that may not have been everybody in Enron, right? But it's subsets of people acting on their own. And it's just, and that's a great point, in that you have a high probability of ending up with one department may have a certain set of values and a culture because they act a certain way. And then you go into another department and they act completely different. Right. And they have their own departmental environment and culture. And one department doesn't trust the other department. They don't work well together. There's no camaraderie. There's no team building. There's no collaboration, because they're all operating on a different set of behaviors against no framework. So if even what your question earlier about, we don't need that, really look at your teams and how people not just function on their team, but how do team, and team meaning department, division, whatever your hierarchy is for your company, how do they function together, right? How do they function when they're in front of customers or clients, and so forth? Do you see differences? Does one group do something better than the other? Is there seem to be a better culture in the accounting department than there is in the operations side of the house? Why is that? What's happening? What's the difference? Why aren't we seeing a collective culture across all departments? Those can be some indicators, like you said, of like distrust, things happening, and then you have those tragic times where it just implodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned it, I think, unless you've got something additional that you would say, but what is the key thing you want listeners to remember about values-based leadership?
I think the key thing is, in the absence of values, you have the propensity to work in a very chaotic type of environment. The benefit of it is that you establish a framework, a blueprint of behaviors that you want to see from top to bottom, and it's got to be top to bottom. It's not just what you're seeing from the C-suite. It's not just what you're seeing from your junior employees. It's everybody operating. It's a common operating picture, full of the right types of behaviors that you want to see on a daily basis. Mm-hmm.
So last couple of questions for you,
Sure.
Bo. I like to ask all of my guests these two questions. The answers are always interesting. But what is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew?
That I wish everybody knew. I think it's one of the things, Reshad, that is it's in the line of, it sounds simple, but you just don't see it enough. You must genuinely care about the people that you lead. And if you want them to follow you through any situation, good or bad, they need to know it. They need to know that you care. And what does that mean? It means you're putting their best interests above your own all the time on a regular basis. It means, if you're in a leadership spot, and this happens where one day you're on a team and you're good, you perform, you're the best at your job, and you're recognized with a promotion, which is fantastic, and you deserve it. And now you're in charge of that team, or you're moved and you're put in charge of another team, but now you're in a leadership position. And even without any training, maybe you have no professional development, start with caring about your team. You don't, and that's, simple things, make sure that, you're at work first and you leave last. Make sure that you talk to your people, that you listen to them, and that you don't just brush them off. You're not just the person doing all the talking, you're listening. Know about them, know what's happening in their lives, what impacts them on a regular basis, so you can see when their demeanor is a little bit off, or something, and they're just not the same as they were last week, and so forth, or their performance drops. When you care about somebody, you know about them, you know things about them, you know how they normally behave on a regular basis, so that you're not just jumping to, oh, he's a low performer, time to find a replacement. You're identifying those things way before you get to that point, because you know them, you know their character, you know how they behave, you know their who they are as an individual. You don't get there unless you show that you care about them.
Yeah, and I love that, Bo. I really do. The working world would be a much greater place with more of that mentality.
Yeah. For sure. No, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, my pleasure. When it's all said and done, Bo, what 3 words do you want to be used to describe your life?
That my life had purpose, and that I lived a purposeful life, and that I was respected in who I was as an individual, as a leader, as a contributor to my family, to society, and that I was loved. And I think those are 3 pretty profound. Try to keep it simple, but they're the things that you strive for, as I think I strive for as a human being. Yeah, another great question.
And I think that's, the simple is what I'm going for. 3 words. Yeah. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to look up Webster's dictionary to find a word that's, sometimes the best answers are definitely the most simple ones. So appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Bo.
For sure.
Just wrapping up now, Bo, where can people connect with you? What can they, where can they find your book? Where can they find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So the easiest place to find the book is on Amazon. Just look up Bo Brabo, Bo with spelled B-O, Brabo's B-R-A-B-O. There's only one of me on Amazon, so it's easy to find. The title of the book is From the Battlefield to the White House to the Boardroom. It'll pop right up as well. I sell signed copies of the book. If you want a signed copy, you can get that from my website directly, which is robertbrabo.com. First name is Robert. Always go by Bo, but my website is robertbrabo.com. Follow me on Instagram at Bo Brabo. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with any of your listeners. I'm pretty open with that because I'd like to get as much of the message out there as possible to anybody who wants to hear it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate all your input today on values-based leadership. I can't wait for the listeners to hear this. They're going to get so much out of it.
Thank you.
Really good conversation. So thank you very much for sharing with us today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Reshad.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at RE Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.